On payday, it's hard to know what's the best things to do with your money. There are so many options and we only have so much money to put aside. Well, from working as a financial analyst and gathering the finances to quit my own job, I'm going to share with you the 8 best things you need to do as soon as you get paid. Step number 1 is to figure out your financial yardstick. See, in the best-selling personal finance book, The Millionaire Next Door, the authors analyzed what allowed people to become millionaires, and they found it starts by learning how to play extremely detailed defense. Let's say you figured out how to save $20 a day. On the surface, it doesn't seem like much, but if we invest that money into the stock market at $20 a day, it would grow to $1.2 million over 30 years. Now imagine what would happen if that was $50 a day or $100 a day. You'd become a multi-millionaire. This is why you want to start by getting a detailed understanding of your expenses, and more specifically, your financial yardstick. What you want to do is record how much you spend each month on every type of expense, whether it's housing, groceries, clothing, and so on. And then you want to group these expenses into 2 broad categories: needs and wants. Your needs represent your financial yardstick, the amount it costs you to survive for a month. And there's 2 questions to answer here. The first is whether you're playing good enough defense. Are your expenses low enough? Experts suggest that your needs and wants should roughly make up 50 and 30% of your take-home pay respectively. This allows you to save 20%, which for the typical salary should put you in a good position to retire in your 60s. But if you're like me and you want to retire a little earlier, we want to answer this second question, which is whether we can play better defense. Because we know that small increases in how much we can invest can mean millions down the road. And so to make sure I can save 60% of my income, I go through every expense on my list thinking about 4 things. Can I eliminate it by getting rid of it? Can I substitute it by finding another solution? Can I simplify it by not buying the latest and greatest? Or can I share the cost with someone else? For example, if it's rent, we can eliminate it by staying with our family, substitute it by house sitting, simplify it by having a cheaper home, or share the cost with a housemate. Trust me, when you do this, you'll start finding creative ways to reduce your costs. And at the end of this, you'll now have 2 new numbers for your needs and wants, of which you can then set aside into 2 separate spending accounts and move on to step 2. The question now is, where's the first place to put your savings that will help you grow your wealth the fastest? Well, it's not actually saving or investing, it's to stop any big leaks. See, in the world of finance, the budgeting of money is all about comparing rate of returns, which is simply the percentage benefit something can give us if we put $1 into it. For example, if we put $1 into a savings account that earns 5% per year, we'd have a rate of return of 5%. Or if we invest it into stocks, which increases at 10% per year, we'd have a rate of return of 10%. And while saving and investing sounds good, the return we get from them isn't the highest if we have things like credit card debt, which costs us anywhere from 20 to 30% per year. A rate of return that's 2 to 3 times greater than investing and 4 to 6 times greater than interest from a savings account. But it doesn't just stop there. Interest on debt compounds, meaning it grows on top of itself every year. So if we have $5,000 in debt and we decide to let $5,000 sit in a savings account that earns 5% per year, we'd be letting our debt double if we have it for 3 years and quadruple in 6 years, all whilst we gain very little. This is why step number 2 is to pay off any high interest debts, and to pay them off in the order of highest interest rate first. Now, once we've paid off our high interest debt, there's one more risk to cover. Statistically, many of us don't have enough savings to handle an emergency expense. This means our chances of falling back into debt is actually quite high. And because paying off high interest debt gives us the best rate of return, we want to make sure we can prevent ourselves from falling back into debt. This is why step number 3 is to save up a short-term debt prevention fund, which is roughly 1 month worth of expenses so you can deal with any short-term issues. And there's 2 good places to keep this money. Firstly, if or when you get a home loan, you can put this money into your mortgage offset account. This reduces the amount of interest you pay on your home loan, which is usually higher than the rate of interest you'd normally gain in a higher interest savings account. And the second place you can put this money is in a high interest savings account. But I want to point out that it's good to shop around online for the best interest rates, because most of the time the big retail banks we go with don't provide the best rates due to all the extra costs they have to cover. So now that we've covered the basics, it's time to start building towards the future. And step number 4 depends on where you live. If you live in a country where your employer will match some or more of your contributions to your retirement fund, like a 401k in the US or your workplace pension in the UK, then you immediately guarantee a return on your money. And because the most common arrangement is your employer will match 50% of your contributions, that return is at least 50%. The good thing is these contributions also reduce your taxable income, meaning you save an extra 10 to 45% on taxes, depending on your tax bracket and where you live. However, it's worth noting that you may need to pay some taxes when you eventually withdraw during retirement. Regardless, there's basically nowhere else you can guarantee at least a 50% return on your money. That's why step number 4 is to maximize your matched retirement contributions. But now you may be wondering why we don't do this before paying off high interest debt, since we get at least 50% from our employer and an extra 10 to 45% from the government. Isn't this larger than the 20 to 30% from paying off high interest debt? Well, it's because the employer match and tax savings are a one-off benefit, whereas the interest on debt compounds every year at roughly 25%. And whilst the average retirement fund also grows every year, it's usually only around 7%. So we can see that our debt can outgrow the benefits we get from these retirement contributions within 3.5 years. Meaning it's better to pay off your high interest debt first if there's any risk of you not paying it off within 3.5 years. Now it's time to put yourself into a secure financial position, where regardless of what happens in your life, whether you lose your job or you have a health issue, you have enough money to handle any emergency expense without needing to sell any of your assets like your car or your investments. This is why step number 5 is to expand your debt prevention fund into a full-size emergency fund, which experts suggest you should have 3 to 6 months of your essential living expenses saved up, which is the financial yardstick we calculated earlier. The question though is, how much should you save? Well, if your life situation is pretty stable, like you've got a secure job and your house and car are all in good condition, then 3 months of your living expenses would put you in a good place. But if your income or living conditions are inconsistent, then you'd want to consider saving 6 months instead. Now, this is where many people start to consider investing. But after reading multimillionaire MJ DeMarco's book, The Millionaire Fast Lane, I realized that there's something more important. See, we know that investing is powerful. For each $10,000 we can invest every year, we end up with roughly 1.6 million in 30 years. So then wouldn't it be nice to somehow invest 20,000 a year and have 3.3 million instead? And this leads me to my point, which is any investments we can make today to increase our income by even $10,000 will pay itself off multiple times over and make us multi-millionaires down the road. And this income effect is so powerful that someone that can invest 20,000 a year can delay investing by 7 years and still make the same amount of money as someone that invests 10,000 a year. That's why step number 6 is to put money towards an income accelerator fund, to set ourselves up to create true wealth. And there's 2 great things you can do with this money. The first is to take on one-sided bets. As MJ DeMarco talks about in his book, a lot of people become millionaires through taking opportunities where the cost of failing is low, but the reward of winning is high. And you can see this with all the young people who become rich from dropshipping, social media, or affiliate marketing. These opportunities don't require much money, but they pay well if it works out, meaning you can keep trying until you learn how to do it properly. It's a one-sided bet. And so for me, my income accelerator fund has been dedicated to saving many months worth of expenses so I can quit my job and take on a one-sided bet. And if you want more ideas on one-sided bets, I really recommend reading The Millionaire Fast Lane. As someone who's done an MBA, it's by far the best book on business and money I've read. So I'll leave a link for it in the description. The second thing you can do with your income accelerator fund has what's helped me go from minimum wage to seeing job opportunities worth around 180,000 in a few years. As we've seen, one reasonable pay increase can make you a multi-millionaire later on. That's why I consistently invest in my skills and knowledge. Every year, I go through multiple books and courses that I know will help get me a pay rise and help me make more money when I take on a one-sided bet. After we've set aside some money to increase our income, it does make sense to invest some money and get some benefit from compound interest, with experts suggesting that your investment should make up 15% of your income, including the retirement contributions I mentioned earlier. But what can make a big difference in your investing returns is learning how to invest efficiently through reducing the amount of taxes and fees you pay. When it comes to reducing taxes and you're in the US, you can invest through a Roth IRA, where you don't have to pay capital gains tax as long as you withdraw after you turn 59 and a half. And if you're in the UK, you have the stocks and shares ISA, where you pay no capital gains tax. And if you don't have access to these types of accounts, you can still invest through normal taxable brokerage accounts, which if you're in the US or Australia, you can reduce your capital gains tax if you hold a stock for longer than a year. But taxes aren't the only thing to watch out for. Fees can eat a huge portion into your returns. See, if you invest say $2,000 and the brokerage fee is $20, you'll be losing 1% when you buy and another 1% when you sell, which is 20% of your total gains if your average returns are 10% per year. So be sure to look for brokers with low fees. It's also important to note that if you buy index funds, to be aware of the management fees they charge, which can be over 1% every year, which again costs you at least another 10% of your total returns. So look for funds which offer low management fees. There are plenty that charge less than 0.1%. Following all the previous steps should put you in a very good financial position. That's why step 8 is about using the rest of your money to achieve your life goals. And there's two things you want to think about here. The first is to think about what you want your life to look like in 10, 20, 30 years. What type of house will you have? How many kids? Are you going to buy a new car? The second thing to think about is which of these goals you want to work towards right now and turn them into monthly savings targets. For example, if you want a $500,000 home in the next 5 years, then you're going to need to set aside an extra $1,600 a month for the deposit. Once you have these targets, it's all about putting spare money aside for each of them. And the order of this is really up to how you want your life to look like. But if you're ever unsure, you can always consider what has the highest rate of return. Now, once you've made all these payday decisions, it's good to set up separate bank accounts for each separate goal, alongside automatic monthly transfers so that every time you get paid, your bank automatically moves the right amount of funds to each account. Meaning the only thing you need to think about on payday is whether you're on track to meet your financial goals and how to get there faster. And so if you're interested in what I did to speed up my savings goals, you can watch this video right here. Till then, you only live this life once, make the most of it.